a fun-filled night, but we're not offended if you decide not to spend your evening with us.
Noted. Thank you.
So it's not on the next meeting, but the first regularly scheduled meeting, because we have a meeting on the 15th.
Oh, a full council meeting on the 15th. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Wright. Okay, the next docket item we have is item 357-23. This is item to transfer $446,104.67 to the Health and Human Services Department. Excuse me. Who was here to talk about that? Commissioner Walsh. Welcome, Commissioner Walsh. Are you here to tell us about that one?
Yes.
Great. Welcome. Welcome to Programs and Services. It's so nice to have you back.
Thank you. I'm joined by my colleague, Megan Kennedy, who's our Director of Social Services. Just want her to give a wave to everybody too. Happy to be here to talk about something really important. A lot of our local towns and cities signed on to the opioid settlement funds. Newton was one of them. There's, you can see in your supporting documents, I don't have to read them all to you, but $900 million came to the state of Massachusetts. 40% of that money was available to cities and towns that signed on to use that money directly for their residents in this opioid crisis that we find ourselves in. For Newton, that means over the course of 17 years until 2039, we will receive $3.8 million. So this is the first installment, if you will, from multiple pharmacies that have come to our city. And we have developed a coalition, a little over a year old now, October of 2022. It's a phenomenal group of people that come together to talk about how we can use this money in our work, both in public and private partnerships, directly related to the opioid crisis, helping people with treatment, recovery, resources. The name is Newton Coalition for Community Wellness. Those of you who like to peruse our website, it's robust, it's amazingly full of resources, and that group is a phenomenal group with both people with lived experience, people who work in the field of social work and medical, and we plan on doing a lot of important work to help folks that are suffering from substance use disorder, and to the people here that help people stay sober, stay away from these addictive substances. It's a battle. I asked Megan today to pull some statistics just from our city. You can find Middlesex statistics from the DA's office, but in our city, we lose people to opioid overdoses every year. So the most recent one was 5, I believe, fatal overdoses since January of this year. 4 people were Newton residents and 1 person was a non-Newton resident who we responded to here in the city. So the problem is here for those that maybe think that we're immune. And this is the money that will help us work with that. So I am happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you. And I know the sort of restrictions around the money were articulated in the materials as well, and the purposes for which the money will be used was laid out nicely in your letter as well. For folks who haven't, it's in the materials. Councillor Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to comment and ask some questions on a couple things, especially because Councillor Ryan is busy with something else at the moment and is our committee's member of the task force. I don't know if that's going to continue as she was not reelected last night, but I really appreciate it.
Councillor Humphrey, I understand you have COVID or had COVID.
I do, yes. That's neither here nor there, but an ongoing long process. Anyway.
Another public health problem. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I had a long, glorious run without it up until last week. Anyway, I really
Was
appreciated.
COVID really a public health problem? I don't recall that coming up. Okay.
I
ahead,
really
Dr.
appreciated the opportunity from both of you to go to that event with Counselor Ryan at the Newton Wellesley Hospital in recognition of the opioid overdose awareness month, and it was I thought a very powerful reminder of how bad this crisis continues to be statewide, and as you just noted, in Newton. And it's good to be able to focus on it again in discussions like this, just because there was a few years where it was kind of a peak attention thing, and then it's still an ongoing situation, but not getting quite as much discussion. And one of the things that I really connected with at that event was how many people from different backgrounds kept commenting, whether they were family members or whether they were people that had struggled with this themselves or they were health professionals. They were all just saying, like, we're not accomplishing anything on this by not talking about it, and the only way we're making progress is by talking about it. I did have one minor question about the process here. Maybe this is a question for Mr. Yo. Why did this money procedurally end up at free cash instead of some specific account to begin with? I mean, I understand that we're transferring it to that. I was just curious as to for the settlement money, like, why did it not go to a specific account?
My understanding, Jonathan, I don't see Perry here, but my understanding is this is the way it was required through the settlement to be distributed to cities and towns initially. So I've been working with Perry on, and he's been collecting all of these different checks because they're from different settlements from different pharmacies. And we've just sort of waited and sat on that until we were ready. I don't know, Jonathan, if you can explain it any different than that, but it was very prescribed by the AG's office of how the settlement monies were distributed.
Very, very prescribed how they're distributed and then how they're going to be used. Yeah, not to supplant existing programs to do new programs, but the whole distribution has been, it's been very interesting and very unlike anything, any municipality's seen before. This is a gigantic nationwide thing. So
yeah, no, I was
Jonathan,
just
I know you're probably in a couple different meetings, but Councilor Humphrey was asking about the trail of the money, why it went to free cash and was being transferred from free cash.
Oh, I think it was, I'm sorry, it was taken in as cash last year and it as revenue, and it falls to free cash, and now we're redeploying it. So
okay. I was just clarifying
we're
the
following
process
the money,
there.
don't
Yeah.
worry, but it bounces a few times.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm very glad to hear that we're moving forward with this money, and I think this amount of money, I hope, is going to provide quite a bit of new programming, as you said, that it has to be new, additional stuff. And did you have a sense of? I mean, you kind of, the AG's office mentioned things it could be used for, but did we have a sense of specifically how we're going to use it, or is there anything you want to talk about there yet?
In the memo at the end, we talk about how the coalition has 5 areas. And yes, we have a really robust work plan for how to spend the money. Anything from working with the substance use services disorder clinic that already exists right here in Newton to doing a lot of prevention work with the Newton Public Schools and youth. And Megan, you might want to mention a couple of other things. We want to do overdose awareness, Narcan distribution. We have a whole wish list, but maybe you'll want to speak a little bit to that, Megan.
Sure. So thank you for having us. One of the things I wanted to mention was we distribute Narcan through HHS. As Linda said, one of the items that we're thinking about and that other municipalities have is what's called a nalox box. It's called different things in different communities, but essentially it's an AED box. If you can picture that, it's all in our public buildings. This is one that has Narcan in it. So I actually have Narcan here because I did a training to the school nurses yesterday, and we would have it in all the buildings, probably in north and south, have it on both sides of the building so that people can access it quickly. We're working with Coastal Ambulance they would restock it. So I think, when we talk about what we're doing with it, I'm a big prevention person. I believe in it. I think kind of prevention and harm reduction should be where we live for a bit. And so this would be two of those goals. But I think Narcan, having it in your house like an EpiPen, having it with you is really important.
I also appreciate the focus on prevention and harm reduction, but I've also been hearing a lot lately about for folks that are able to try to get their lives back on track, how do we support them in that particular aspect of the journey?
Sure.
Once they've, made the decision and have the support system to try to get that, like, there's situations where somebody's life has basically been completely blown up by their interactions with these substances, and they're ready to try to get back on track. Obviously, we know that doesn't always work the first time, but it's so expensive to start over. That's the thing that I just, keep experiencing. Yes, some people have the family safety net that they can rely on, but it's it'd be interesting to see if we could think about ways of supporting those people in that particular phase as well. Because it's obviously so much less expensive for the government to provide a little bit of help getting someone back on their feet in a permanent way than to have to keep providing resources to help them on an ongoing basis because they don't have the ability to get back on their feet. And it's just, I know people that have, had to start over with $0 in their bank account, and the climb back from that can be pretty formidable and very discouraging. And, the more people are feeling that discouragement, the more they're likely to, slip and fall again. I guess we'll call it. So,
I
I just,
appreciate you bringing that up because it's definitely part of our conversation. Megan and her social services team has already identified some of those resource gaps that this money could be utilized for to try to get people not only to continue in recovery, but as you said, be able to get back up. There's transportation costs, there's co-pays. I mean, it just goes on. So we are trying to think about traditional, and I agree with Megan, prevention and harm, but also this money gives us an opportunity to really try to think outside the box. And thank you, Councilor Humphries. I also want to thank you for showing up to those kinds of programs and meetings. That it's really helpful and important to have your support. So I think that I will be back in front of you for sure and explaining more in detail the different programs that this money will go to directly to benefit the residents who not only for prevention, but to your point, are in that cycle right now, because data does show it takes multiple attempts. So we have our eyes on that, but not just we, this coalition. This coalition brings forth those wonderful ideas. Megan, you had unmuted. Was there something else? One other thought you had? I don't want to.
No, I was just, I had a client come in, a resident come in yesterday, actually, who had some sober time and just recently relapsed and is starting over from just what you talked about, Councilor Humphrey. So we're walking that walk together with $0, and he's starting to, I'm helping with rental assistance, and we're doing SNAP, food stamp applications. So it is, you're right, is that it's kind of the everyday work, but it happens, and it happens in our city all the time. So thank you for bringing that forward.
I'm glad to hear that. It's just like, I've definitely been thinking a lot lately about that it's never like one factor. It's always the interaction of factors. And one of the huge nexus points in this country in particular is that interaction between the material conditions someone is facing and their kind of mental state that's directly related to that, right? If they feel like a sense of progress and that they can do this, they're going to have a much easier time succeeding overall. If by contrast, they feel like they just can't get ahead of their costs of living and things like that, and that they're never going to get back on track, then it becomes very easy to despair And I think that's where a lot of this comes in. So anyway, I'll leave it
100%.
at there. I've taken up too much of the committee's time on this, but I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
No problem. I think it's a fair point. It's a good point. I think most people who suffer from addiction don't reach out for help until they've, hit rock bottom, until they bottomed out. And usually that means both mentally, financially, physically often, so it's a good point that they need a lot of help to get back on their feet, to get that assistance, which can seem like a very daunting task when all those things lay before you. And you're probably feeling isolated from your support network and those who have gotten you to where you are. So I appreciate you making the points. Thank you, Councilor Humphrey. Want to quickly mention that we've been joined by Councilor Greenberg, who is the member of the committee from Ward 1. I don't see any other hands up. So if someone wanted to move approval or make any other motion.
So moved.
Councilor Baker has moved approval. Thank you for noticing that this was the group participation time. Councilor Baker's moved approval of 357-23. Any discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? It is 5-0, Jeff, and I believe. Thank you. Next item on our agenda, item 358-23. This is the item to transfer $130,000 to clinical health temp staffing. Commissioner Walsh, are you going to tell us
Still
about this
me,
one?
Counselor.
Well, I just want to say, Commissioner Walsh, it's been a while since we've seen you here. It's great to have you here tonight. Welcome back to Programs and Services.
I appreciate it. As all of you know, the school nurses work for Health and Human Services, which is a terrific model, different than many cities and towns, but a terrific model. And we are struggling, like everybody's struggling to find nurses. Recruiting and retaining nurses is extremely difficult. I was at Newton Wellesley Hospital for one of their community benefits a couple of weeks ago, talking to their nurse director, and we're all looking at the same pool of people. It's really very, very difficult. So what we've had to do this year, we started the year down 5 school nurse positions, various things in June, retirements, people moving, people taking different jobs. We were only—
I'm sorry, Commissioner Walsh, down 5. Aren't there only like 11 or 12? How many are there total?
There are 30.
30. Okay.
Yeah, we have 23 schools. Many of them have 2 nurses, and then we have some float nurses.
I thought there were some shared. Okay. 30. Great. Okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we
Go ahead.
have a robust crew. But we were starting the year down 30, and our terrific director of school nurses interviewed dozens and dozens of people, and we were only able to recruit 2. So we started the year down 3 full-time positions, and we are still down 3 full-time positions. We've worked with our HR department. They've been very supportive in trying to get the word out. We've interviewed a lot of people. But as many of you know, the school nurses are relied on heavily, and we have 1 nurse. We have 2 nurses out right now. One's on maternity leave, one's having surgery, one's going out next week. So we're always concerned about not having a nurse in a building. We move people around. They're super flexible, but we need that complement of 30 people every single day. And therefore, we've gone to agency staffing. I've done that before in my career here. We have used agency staffing before. It isn't something that we like to do because it is more money per hour than our own folks. But we don't at this point have a choice. We're still recruiting, we're still interviewing, we're still trying really hard. Any of you who know nurses, tell them that we're a wonderful place to work. So we're not going to stop our efforts at trying to get our 3 full-time positions filled. But in the meantime, to make sure we can staff the health rooms, get the screenings done, and do the work every single day, we are going to have to rely on the agency. And this transfer of funds is, the money's available, but in a different section of the budget, up in personnel. We have a line item for temporary staffing, but it requires me to ask for the transfer of funds so it can be utilized in this other line item. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Counselor Humphrey.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. This is not a question. It is unfortunately a comment, but it's for the benefit of the record. Obviously going to support this because we need to get these positions covered, but I am very concerned about these vacancies and making sure that they do get filled on a permanent basis. Temp staffing, has become very prevalent in the nursing field, but it is not a long-term solution. It's not a good idea for us as a community to do this. And I just really hope that it does not become a permanent feature. And I think you've addressed that in your remarks. So I'm not saying that you didn't. I'm just noting that it's worrying to me. And I think we need to make sure we're thinking very holistically about what it's going to take to get those positions filled permanently. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Wright.
I'm just wondering, and maybe this is a Mr. Yo question. So there in the school budget was for, staffing for all these nurses. So where does,
No,
oh, not the school budget, but in the health
city budget,
service budget, right?
the city HHS budget.
Yeah. So where does that, since we're not staffing those people, where does that money go then? Does that go into free cash or what?
Eventually, unless it gets moved into, which we would have to do coming to the council if we were going to move it into a program or something like that towards the end of the fiscal year. But vacancy money does eventually become free cash.
Okay. Thank you.
You can't roll it over. So.
Yeah, I didn't know if you could use that money into this area, but.
Well, that's essentially what we're doing. We're using vacancy money to help fund temp nurses, right, Linda?
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Counselor Harper again.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. On that particular note, is the docket item correctly drafted to say that it's coming from personnel? I see that in the memo, but I was wondering if it needed to say that in the actual thing.
The key thing is the account number. It's a good question. I noticed that too. It didn't say that, but it's the account number is what is the important thing in terms of the transfer of funds.
Yeah, I'm just saying because I see in the October 27th memo, it does have, from this account to this account. I'm just concerned about whether or not that made it into the actual language of the item.
Legally, Jacqueline, I think we just need the account number is all that's really needed to move money from one to the other. I mean, you could add in a few words if you want.
So Jonathan, I hear you saying that the account number is needed. You mean in the docket item? So do we?
The docket item, I believe, has the account numbers.
The docket item does not show the account numbers, but
The
I
docket
think
language does not show the account numbers. It would need to be amended to have them.
It should include the account numbers similar to what's in the backup memo. That's traditionally the way we've done it.
Yeah, is it
I
also
know-
supposed to have the from number because that's not?
Yeah,
So-
from
So
you're
that's
right.
that's in the memo because it's three separate accounts, right? It's 20,000, 40,000, 70,000 from three separate accounts into one new account for this purpose. When someone makes a motion to approve this, perhaps someone could make a motion to approve it from the accounts as articulated in the memo.
Yeah.
And then Jacqueline, we can just work to make sure that's reflected in the final, the language of the item as approved, or
That
at
was-
least the motion.
Going to be my next suggestion as the motion maker who is not the chair. So
Okay, so
that's what I'm moving.
I mean, if I
Yeah.
said what you're planning to do, let's do that. If I said it right, or if I didn't, do what is needed.
Yeah, no, that was my motion.
Okay, Counselor Humphrey has moved approval, and he's moved approval as articulated in the backup memo dated October 27th, with the 20,000 coming from 0150101-511001, 40,000 coming from 0150102-511001, and 70,000 coming from 0150103-511001, all of which are being transferred into 0150103-531300. Did I get your motion
Flawless
correct?
execution. Thank you. It sounded like it came out of my mouth.
We're so in sync, Councilor Harvey. It's like we finish each other's.
Sandwiches.
Perfect. All right. All those in favor, sorry, any discussion on the motion? Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
I
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? 5-0. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Walsh. I think that may be the end of the night for you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate the support.
Bid you farewell. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Appreciate it. The next item, next two items, if I'm not mistaken, we take together. This is 314-23. Discussion and possible creation of an ordinance regarding vibration control measures. And item 88-22, this is a request for a study on construction vibration standards. Where we last left off, we had done some work on this, raised some questions. The law department was working on compiling the ordinance that appears in the packet. Let me give Mr. Temple, Jonah, you worked on this, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I can give you an opportunity to say anything about this item that you want, and then we can open it up to the committee for questions or changes or any general discussion. So, Mr. Temple, you want to
Yes.
talk about the work that went into the draft?
Thank you. It looks like I'm the only member of our internal working group here tonight, so you're stuck with me. Let me just briefly run through the revisions in the ordinance based on the committee discussion at the last meeting. So first, we changed the exemption for compaction work from 700 square feet to 900 square feet, and that was to account for by right detached accessory apartments. I'm not sure if there was full consensus for that one from the committee, and it's probably worth further discussion and debate, but we wanted to put that language in there so you can see what it looks like and you can walk it back if you prefer. We also added in additional abutter notice requirements that include estimate construction timeline and contact information.
I apologize for interrupting, Jonah. I just want to go back because we'll be going through a few things. So let me just see if anyone had any questions. That actually increases the reach of the ordinance, if I'm not mistaken, right? By increasing the threshold up to 900 square
No,
feet.
it decreases it because it's increasing the exemption to having to comply with
exemption.
vibration control.
Okay.
And
Okay.
and if you let me run through this list, and then if it's easier,
Okay.
I can put it up on the screen and we can kind of scroll through it.
Sure.
We also added in abutter notice requirements for construction timeline and contact information for the abutters. We added in a requirement that the results of the pre-construction surveys be provided to the homeowners. We added in a requirement to identify historic properties in the vicinity and additional protections for those properties. We clarified that post-construction surveys are required, and also clarified terminology as to how we refer to the geotechnical consultant, which is now just simply referred to as a licensed professional engineer. And then we added in an effective date of March 1, 2024, which is something the committee can certainly discuss, but we wanted to pick a date that gives the development community and homeowners enough notice to comply with this. So that really is it for the most part. And if you'd like, Chair, I can share my screen and we can scroll through it.
Yeah, I think that might be helpful. Let's see what the questions are, and then I think you can share your screen. Square your sheen. You can share your screen appropriately. Councilor Wright.
So the change to go up to 900 instead of 700, why pick 700 to begin with? Why that threshold? And I want to understand a little bit more increasing it.
So the 700 that we went with is because that's the by right limit for a detached garage or an accessory structure, except that there was a recent amendment to the accessory apartment ordinance that allowed detached accessory apartments to go up to 900.
So, I mean, we're still not saying you can't do it, but a garage generally just going to have, poured concrete. But depending what they want to do with accessory dwelling unit, there might be more things going on in which vibrations would happen. And especially since they can be closer to the property line than a regular home, I would be more worried, and I'd like to keep it down at 700 and not increase it to 900.
Jonah, this was the working group that decided to go up to 900, is that right?
Yeah, but I think it's fair to say there wasn't strong feelings one way or the other, or strong
Okay.
consensus. So I think that whatever the committee prefers.
Okay,
Because my concern is you're even closer to the setbacks with an ADU than a regular house. And you may have your vibration. Where are you considering you getting most of your vibration?
Well, this exemption is specific to soil compaction work. That's it.
Okay. Again, there's a difference in just doing a garage and a slab versus, they may put in a basement or whatever. I'd like to keep it down at 700.
should I just see, is there unanimous consent from the committee to keep it at 700? Or did anyone
No,
want to?
we,
No, okay,
Ask a
great.
question.
Okay, and we'll keep discussing that. Councilor Wright, do you have anything else before I move on to Councilor
Yeah,
Baker?
and you mentioned a little bit, tell me a little bit about historic.
Yeah, it might make sense for me just to share my screen so you can
Yep.
see the.
Go ahead.
I have comments about both those too.
So it's this language here. The vibration control plan shall also identify any properties that may be affected by vibration that are landmarked or listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and state any specific protective measures or monitoring necessary to protect those properties. So this language is really in line with the whole intent and approach of the ordinance, which is putting the requirement on the geotechnical professional to be the one to determine the scope of affected properties and the appropriate measures to perform vibration control measures, and not have it be dictated by any standards set by the city.
So, but here you have like no distance, in the neighborhood. What?
No, that's the whole point. It's up to the geotechnical engineer to determine the distance and the scope of affected properties, because for some projects it might just be direct abutters. For
Okay.
other projects it might be a larger scope, and we can't just pick an arbitrary number.
So the other place I see where there's issues on vibration, and this is not so much for a homeowner, but bigger projects, is if the house is cement or brick versus timber. I mean, timber houses will absorb shakes and movement much better than a brick structure. And there'll be more damage in a brick structure. Like my
Right, no,
house
that's-
is,
yeah.
yeah,
Sorry,
my
sorry.
house. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's absolutely right. And that's just an example of one of like 10, 15, 20 variables that impact the potential range of vibration damage and measure. So we can't really plan for all of those variables.
Okay. I mean, I just feel like there isn't, especially for the big projects, like a trio type thing. A brick structure is gonna, or a church, type of thing, a brick church, and that will get more damage than a wooden house.
And Jonah, when you're talking about the geotechnical consultant, of course, you mean the licensed and insured professional engineer, right?
Yes, that is the term in the ordinance. That's correct.
Okay. And I think Councilor Wright, I don't know if you're satisfied, but I think what he's saying is that the point of this ordinance is to ensure that that individual gets involved and makes the determinations exactly like you're talking about, that it's not something that we would articulate necessarily in the ordinance, but something that the professional engineer would have to reference and include in part of the vibration control plan.
Okay. So they will be looking at the neighborhood and who may be, how far it's gonna go and what structures may be affected by it.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's the point.
Okay. Okay.
I think, Jonah, I don't want to speak for you, but right?
No, that's absolutely right. And I think the
Okay.
only other thing I'd add, Councilor Wright, is for the very large projects, which will still be coming in for a special permit, if there is a specific old church or building we know needs specific protections, it could be addressed through the special permit process. I mean, the whole point of this is that it's uniform and it applies evenly to by right and special permit, but certainly there could be a unique circumstance down the road.
No. Okay, I feel better
Okay.
about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so I want to talk about the 900 square feet thing. This
Okay,
was
so we're
something
back
that,
into the compaction exemption.
yes, so this is, well, I mean, it's in general, right? I mean, isn't this talking about that the regulation would be triggered in general with this?
No, it's the highlighted language as Joan is showing here. So this is saying you need one of these with the exception of 1, 2, and 3. And 3 is soil compaction by vibration roller for a unit that is a ground floor area up to 900 square feet.
Yeah, but my point is that if you are having to do something and it falls within, I mean, above the X number of square feet, then it's going to trigger all these requirements about a vibration control plan and what we are no longer referring to as a geotechnical consultant, but is, right? Like
A licensed and
correct.
insured professional engineer.
okay, so the issue here, this is why I raised this before, is that we passed an ordinance, and I understand some people didn't agree with this, but we passed as a council relatively recently an ordinance to make it easier to build accessory dwelling units by right. Many of these accessory dwelling units, though not all, are prefabricated units that come in a defined size, so you can't just necessarily negotiate it down to get under the threshold, right? We went up to 900 with that one. I think that these ordinances should be aligned. I'm not expecting that there's going to be a huge amount of cases where this is applicable, but there might be some. And I don't think that we should be passing this ordinance that's going to potentially make it harder to do by right ADUs without too much complication and expense, right? If this passes and there is a case where it does apply, it's relatively minimal impact, I would argue, on the neighbors, because again, the difference here is 200 square feet. It's not, in between what is and isn't covered, right? So we're not talking about a particularly large structure either way. And you're potentially adding significant time, cost, hoops to jump through, etc. I think it makes sense to align the two ordinances together. I don't see a rationale for doing 700 when we've got 900 in the other ordinance. And I'm concerned that this is going to turn into an attempt to undo the work of the Zoning and Planning Committee on ADU reforms by adding a completely unrelated requirement in a different committee while a bunch of our members are currently not present for the deliberation who are passionate supporters of accessory dwelling unit reform. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm gonna list you as a supporter of the 900 square feet. Counselor Baker.
Thank you. It's a little hard to see everybody because they're sharing the screen. So I guess the question I'm gonna raise, Mr. Temple had the reference to historic. I think in fairness, it ought to reference historic properties within an historic district, not just a landmark or national register, because that the whole purpose of here is to maintain those structures from adverse impacts. So I certainly think we ought to clarify that, to add that in it, unless there's objection from the committee. As far as the 900 square feet, I understand Councilor Humphrey, but this is something that the law department added in that wasn't part of the original draft. I align myself with Councilor Wright. I think part of the difficulty is that if this is a potential impact on an abutting property owner, I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is protect the abutters. It's not, it's obviously a task that somebody has to go through, but it seems to me it's not unreasonable to do that. Now, the committee can decide otherwise, but it seems to me that that's the rationale is independent of the use, to somehow say one particular use is more beneficial than another, and somehow that those impacts don't matter as far as the neighbors go, I think is not fair. But that's my view. So I would keep it at 700.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Baker. Councilor Greenberg.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I totally agree with Councilor Humphrey. I don't want to make this ordinance make it harder to construct ADUs. We're trying to make it easier. We need more of them, so I don't agree with this change.
So you want to keep the 900 as
Right.
it's sort of showing drafted at the moment, right?
Right.
Thank you. 3 issues. Sorry, I'm gonna finish the comments, but if folks could tell me how they want to weigh in if they haven't already on 3 different issues that I think we have before us. One is the 700 and 900. I think I have where everyone stands on those. If we want to specifically reference properties within a historic district raised by Councilor Baker, and also the effective date as proposed by legal, which if I'm not mistaken is March 1st, 2024. So let me know how you feel about all 3 of those if you haven't. Councilor Wright.
So 700, I agree with Councilor Baker, and the date's fine. I just want to point out, I support ADUs. What I didn't support in our latest is being in the setback closer to the property line than what a house structure could be. But I do support ADUs. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Councilor Humphrey.
Well, just to briefly respond to something Councilor Baker said, I believe that this was revised in this particular draft in direct response to the concern that I raised.
Councilor Humphrey, you actually muted after the word raised. Councilor Humphrey, you're on mute. Yep. Can't get off mute.
I don't know what happened there.
There we go. Okay.
That was, I didn't touch anything. Anyway.
It happened in direct response to the concern that you raised.
Yeah.
Then
I raised a concern with Mr. Temple at the last meeting, and I believe that he's being responsive, and the working group is being responsive to the concern that I raised, which I believe was shared by a majority of the committee, the entire committee, not just the committee that's present tonight. Now, I'm fine with the date. I'm ambivalent on the historic point, but I understand the concern being raised. I'm, willing to go along with that. At this time, the suggestion from Councilor Baker on that, but I'm really quite adamant here, and I think a lot of the other councilors will agree with me that 900 is what makes sense to align with the other ordinance. I don't think it makes sense to try to retroactively revise things on a different ordinance and add deterrence in through other unrelated ordinances in a different committee.
Councilor Baker.
So I understand what Councilor Humphrey's trying to do. My concern is 900 square feet. I'd include the ADUs in that. But if there were an exclusion for an ADU specifically that's permitted under the ordinance, that would still allow to capture anything that's over 700 square feet. I think that's a relatively rare event, and if that would get the committee to consensus and get this done, I'd be willing to consider that. Because I don't want to hold up the best of a big improvement here over that particular, but I don't want to just have a blanket exemption for something beyond 700 square feet, because there are a variety of things that get built that can have impacts that are not ADU. So it seems to me that's part of the concern I have, is not just the ADU issue, it's the scope of the work being done. So I don't know if that's, you could just cross-reference the ADU ordinance for that matter.
Your suggestion is, rather than putting in a specific size here, to reference the ADU ordinance?
No, just to say, except for an ADU as of right under 900 square feet, I'm confident that a law department could figure out how to do that.
I think that gets you to the same place though, Counselor, because under the ADU ordinance, 900 is the maximum allowed by right.
No, I understand, but if you had another structure that's not an ADU, I don't want to just make it available for 900 square feet. That's all I'm trying to say. I want to capture all of those above the 700. I want to respond to Councilor Humphrey's point, and I think that he's probably right that the majority of the committee were receptive to his concern. even though I disagree with it. I'd just soon get something done and get it done.
We can certainly
Yeah.
do it in that manner.
So you're suggesting, Council Baker, is to leave it at 700, but add in another clause or something that says, or an accessory dwelling unit?
An accessory dwelling unit of 900 square feet is, an exemption for that. I'm
So-
confident the law department can figure out how to do that. I'm not.
So Counselor Baker, it would say, or accessory buildings with a ground floor up to 700 square feet, comma, or accessory apartments, allowed by right pursuant to section blank.
900 square feet. I think you want to make clear that what the threshold is, because somebody has to look at this ordinance and try and understand the size threshold. So I just put that in. If you want to minimize the amount of cross reference confusion.
I understand that.
Okay.
Councilor Wright, Councilor Humphrey, how do you guys feel about that?
I'm fine with that.
Councilor Humphrey?
Sure.
I mean, I don't want to use the C word, but it feels like we're working towards consensus here.
We're working towards something.
So excuse me, could I just have an explanation? This would exempt ADUs of 900 square feet, but another structure may
So
not be
it's-
exempt?
Yes, so if I understand it correctly, in the soil compaction exemption language, it would reference any accessory unit up to 700 square feet or an accessory dwelling unit up to 900 square feet as articulated in the ordinance for accessory dwelling units.
Oh, do we have a new counselor in the room?
I believe we've been joined by Councilor Ryan, member of the committee for Ward 8, and we've also been joined by Councilor Maliki. Councilor
think it's-
Greenberg, does that answer your question?
So if a different structure is to be built, like a garage, that wouldn't be exempt?
Up to
Correct.
700 square feet, it would be exempt.
Okay. I guess that's okay.
I mean, people get special permits for bigger structures. So if it's going to be a bigger structure than that, they would need to meet this.
Okay, do we have unanimous consent, general consensus on Councilor Baker's idea about adding into, I think it's in A4, a reference to any property located in a historic district?
Yes.
Yep.
Yep, Councilor Humphrey, you good with that?
It's a local historic district, chapter 40C. I just want to be clear. That's what we're talking about. There are 4 of them in the city.
And Joan, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's A4 when just in the list of
Yep.
landmark or register, just add in or start with property located in a local historic district.
Yep.
Okay, and it sounds like we're all good with the March 1st effective date as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I know President Albright has not joined us yet, but I know, Mr. Temple, that she had a question about the standards that the licensed and insured professional engineer is using, and whether the engineer should articulate what standards the engineer used.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the crux of this whole thing, that we don't want to set those standards, but we did discuss it further with the working group, and there aren't any real set industry standards or guidelines or anything hard that we could reference here in the ordinance that makes sense.
No, I don't think it was a question about articulating the standards so much as asking the engineer to articulate the standards that the engineer uses when publishing the report. Does that make sense?
So in addition to having them provide in the report the scope of properties in the area and the measures that they're undertaking, but how they, like the methods they use to determine the measures. We could add in
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, the standards they use to arrive at their
Yeah.
determinations.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the analog is, in accounting, you talk about general accounting principles, I think. Term of art that was cast around in a recent judicial proceeding in my memory.
GAAP or something? What's the shorthand?
Yeah, I can't do it right, but I'm sure.
So I'm just looking at the language that we have. It does say a vibration control plan that determines and identifies the surrounding properties that may be affected by the vibration from the proposed construction activities, the basis for that determination, and the recommended vibration level limits and monitoring services. So I think we already get to it with the basis for that determination, but if you want to clarify that a little further to say the standards used for that determination, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I think that would make her happy.
Sure.
I don't have an objection to it. If anyone else on the committee does, please feel free to raise it, but she knew she was going to be late and raised that with me, so I feel obligated to raise that here. Okay. Councilor Baker.
Just one clarification. I don't have the ordinance now because I was trying to go back and forth. But Mr. Temple just read language that I think speaks to, can you just read it again? There's one leaving aside the what we just talked about. There's a phrase may be added here that might be helpful.
Let me just put it up on the screen again.
Okay.
A1, I believe, John. Yep.
So in full, it says a vibration control plan signed and stamped by a licensed and insured professional engineer that determines and identifies the surrounding properties that may be affected by vibration from the proposed construction activities, the basis for that determination, and the recommended vibration level limits and monitoring services to be provided for the duration of the construction activity.
Okay, thank you. I guess the question I want to ask, and I don't know if the working group addressed this, is just the recommended vibration level limits to protect such property, because it seems to me that the whole idea is not just to say we're going to, we're going to monitor this. The idea is that you're doing something that was designed but I'm not sure that's what you considered, or is that not within the scope of what we're trying to accomplish?
That's a good question, Councilor Baker. I don't know if the addition of that word changes the import in any way. I mean, my initial reaction is I would be okay adding it, but I would want to run that by the working group. But I wouldn't want that one word to hold the passage of this up, at least moving it forward from here.
I would say this, Councilor Baker, I understand why you would want that. My concern is that it's actually limiting in what would be protected. It could be other environmental components or things, trees, structures that are desired to be protected, that maybe by adding in, those houses or structures, maybe it's limiting in some way.
I just, right. Well, there's something monitoring. The question is, what are they monitoring? So I guess it's done for a reason. It seems the recommended vibration level limits, which have a purpose behind them. So that's the only question I had, is whether that makes sense to add some language to that effect.
I think that would be fine.
Like something like for protection of the area.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd say, for the protection of the surveyed properties, right? Because these identifies the surrounding properties that may be affected, and then talks about the recommended vibration level limits for the protection of such property.
I think that language makes sense to me. If for some reason, after speaking with the working group, we have concerns, we can issue a memo or notify you, and you can put it on second call, but I think it should be fine.
Okay. Then I would suggest that in addition, if the committee's will.
Anyone have any objection to that? Speak now or hold your peace until the full council meeting. Okay. I believe that's a go, Jonah.
Great.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. Any other hands, any other points? Okay. Did someone want to make a motion?
So moved.
So I believe that Councilor Baker has moved approval of 314-23, because that's the one that includes the creation of the ordinance. If I'm not mistaken, Jacqueline. So
Yes,
we
that's
probably want to
correct.
approve that item. And then the other one, the request for a study on construction vibration standards, we probably want to either hold or move no action necessary. But I'll defer to you, Councilor Baker. For the moment, I'll say approval of 314-23. Subject to second call, looking at that language, or are you okay?
No, I would go with it. And then if we get a note from the department, we can always put it on second call. Otherwise, we automatically take time from the council.
Yep. Nope, I'm with you. Just want to make sure I had the motion correct. So Councilor Baker has moved approval of 314-23. Any discussion on the motion? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I believe we are 6. We've got a 6 approval. Councilor Baker, you want to move hold or no action necessary on 8822? That's a request for a study on construction vibration standards.
Because Councilor Albright, or President Albright isn't here, I would move hold on it and then we could dispose of it in the next meeting if we need to. That's
Works
all.
for me. Councilor Baker has moved hold. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? We hold. All right. Just one item left. So, oh, sorry, we have 2 items left. Let's maybe, because I know we're still waiting on a couple people. Has Nancy Kritzman joined us?
Is that a reappointment or an appointment?
Oh, it's a reappointment. Okay. Okay. So let's do that one quickly. 343-23. This is the reappointment of Nancy Kritzman. Again, we need to change the docket item. There's no, it's Kritzman. No relation to me. It is not my stepmother, who does live in the city, but is not being appointed to the Commission on Disability. Reappointment of Nancy Kritzman to the Commission on Disability. Anyone want to move approval? Councilor Humphrey, I believe.
No, it's Ward 8.
So,
I'll
like I
move-
said,
I'll
Councilor
move-
Ryan.
Yeah, I'll move approval.
Councilor Ryan has moved approval. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations, Ms. Kritzman. Okay. On to our final 2 items of the night. Let me read them both into the record. Item 411-22, a request for amendment to Chapter 21, Article 3, trees to extend tree protection and update permits. And item 412-22, request for review and amendments to Chapter 21, Article 3, Division 3. Where we left off, we had finished our work as a committee. Law Department had asked for some leave to try and rework the ordinance, which was a little dated, reduce some of our decisions to writing, and present us with the ordinance just to make sure that they reflected the will of the committee as had been determined previously. As folks saw, there were a couple of memos. I think the Law Department prepared a version. I think Jonah can walk us through some of the thinking behind some of the restructuring of the ordinance that was done. I think Councilor Norton had a memo. She had some concerns, and I think the legal department actually responded to some of those concerns. So with all that said, it should all be in your packets, but let me turn it over to Mr. Temple, who can walk us through a little bit of the thinking behind the work of the legal department.
Yeah, I'm actually going to turn it over to Attorney Wilson just to kind of give a brief overview of what we did in our version. And then from there, I defer to you, Chair, how we want to kind of go through it
Sure.
line by line or issue by issue.
Mr.
Councilor
Chairman,
Baker, are you looking to say something before we hear from them?
no, just to clarify, I appreciate that this is a long packet, but the one document that's missing that made it hard for me to be fully responsible, I'm glad to hear from the Law Department, is that we don't have the version the committee was working on. We have the amendments to the ordinance as proposed by the Law Department, and we have, but we don't have the committee language to compare it against, and that makes it a little difficult to me. And it may shape what we do as a committee later on, but I'm certainly willing to hear from the department.
Councilor Baker, the Law Department edits that were in the Friday packet included a red line that reflected every change we made from the committee draft.
I understand that, but what I'm trying to figure out is that, but there were blue lines too. I really got somewhat confused between it's hard enough to read these on the screen as it is, but maybe, let me defer to the department. Maybe you can take us through that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to file the issue, but that was my confusion.
Okay, I think we don't need to belabor the point, but I think the blue language was new language, red was crossed out, but we can get to it. And Jen, you can walk us through just kind of an overview.
So our intent for all of these edits was just to modify the form of the proposed ordinance for clarification and organization purposes. The most significant change we made was creating the definition of exempt trees, which will be a subset of protected trees. So it doesn't change the definition of protected trees. We created the definition for exempt tree for when a homeowner is seeking to remove a tree from their own property and is not planning any construction. We needed to be able to refer to protected trees on 1 and 2 family lots where there's no construction planned in a more simple way. So we created the definition. We then divided up the application section into 2 different sections, one for tree permits and one for exemption permits. The concept of the exemption permit already existed in the draft reviewed at the last meeting where this was discussed. We just created a section to make sure that as the applicants would be able to know what exactly was required for each of the 2 permits. We also divided the tree permit section into 2 subsections, one for the submissions that are required for every tree permit and ones that would only be required depending on the scope of the permit. And then we had a couple of other changes as well. We removed the last 2 sentences from 2183D regarding the notification of tree permit issuance to ISD by the tree warden to match what's actually done in practice. We added an effective date section, and then in various places in the document, we removed language that was duplicative and moved certain provisions to other sections where it fit better.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Anything you want to add, Jonah?
No, I think just that, this was kind of a complicated process where there were 2 completely dueling drafts and the committee was picking and choosing from them. And then on top of that, we had a pretty poorly and old, outdated written existing ordinance. So we really just tried to do our best to put it all together in a way that we certainly felt was keeping with the committee's intent. Clearly, there's some disagreement over that. We're not here to make policy. We're happy to write up whatever policy the committee wants at the end of the day. So I think that's basically it.
Okay, I know there was discussion of an exemption from the fees for low-income individuals.
Yes, I have some language for that I can share on the screen and we can talk through whenever you think that's appropriate.
Okay. So where we left off was as a committee, we would decide if the department the draft we got back from the law department reflected the will of the committee or if it differed in any way. And then we would need to address that. We had not necessarily thought that we were going to be reopening sections or revisiting anything. But if we think that the law department's draft does not accurately reflect the decisions that we made, this would be the time to raise those concerns. Councilor Baker.
So, Mr. Chairman, I guess part of my difficulty is that we had a lengthy memo attached to the report, and I mean the agenda, and then from Councilor Maliki and Norton, neither of whom are here. And then there was a
Councilor Maliki is here.
Say again?
Councilor Maliki is here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. My apologies, colleague. So I guess the question, I'm a little troubled that there's still a difference of opinion about the scope of impact on the butters. There are some language provisions that are a little tricky in the language of what the law department gave us, which is talking about you need an exempt tree needs an exempt tree permit, which somehow is kind of an interesting idea. But I guess what I'm trying to figure out, without pushing the metaphor too far, is how to get through this thicket of red lines and blue lines and so forth, and get to something we can vote out that's going to go to the floor by the end of the year if we can possibly do it. And I'm just wondering whether there's whether this draft is ready or whether we need to take a look at it offline a bit and see if the concerns that have been raised by our colleagues can be resolved in a way that with the department that we can bring to the committee and solve them, because I'm not sure I can responsibly make a decision myself right now.
Well, Counselor Norton has joined us as well, which is nice. So Counselor Norton and Maliki are both here. Counselor Norton, just to catch you up, we just went over, a lot of our sort of went through their thinking behind their memo. I opened it up to the committee and other counselors here to say, are there concerns? Do we have a concern that this draft does not reflect the will of the committee? As we talked about previously, the point of tonight was to try and basically just say, okay, we made all our decisions. Now here they are, they're drafted, or they are not accurately drafted. Let's move forward. So after having given an opportunity to explain the thinking behind some of the changes and restructuring of the ordinance, I then opened it up to counselors to say if there are any lingering concerns. And so I think at a quite opportune time, you have joined us, and I would see if you have some lingering concerns that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, I just, as you could tell from the memo, I assume you could probably tell, I'm frustrated because I feel like the law department just kind of went and did stuff that they weren't asked to do. And I think it would have been appropriate to at least come back to the committee, come back to the spot, the petitioners in this case, to ask, well, what do you think about this concept? Because it was totally different and it was never discussed here. And just to be super clear about how I feel like everyone's lane, like we're the elected officials and the law department works for us. So I don't feel like that relationship was respected in this case. And I would urge the committee, I mean, obviously it's up to the committee, but as one of the key people bringing this forward, I would hope that you wouldn't vote on this tonight because I don't think it's ready. I think that we should go back to the draft that we had before, make the changes that the committee voted on, and then work off of that. And it would be unfortunate if that caused such a delay that it had to move to the next term. But I literally think that that would be better than working off of the draft that we have now. And I'm very disappointed in that. It's been 2 years. I've personally, as well as a lot of other people, have put a lot into this. I know you've all seen the emails that we've got. This is an issue that matters a lot to folks. So I think that that's unfortunate, but that's how I feel about where we are right now.
Thank you, Councilor Norton. I just want to clarify, are you concerned that you liked the structure, style, wording of the ordinance before the law department took a crack at it better, or are you actually concerned that in some substantive way the impact of the new language is different? Or
Both.
that maybe you don't know?
I feel like we had a structure that we were working with for many years and that we were updating. And I don't see the logic, and I don't see, we all are really in it. Maybe we're reading this, we're reading that so we can understand it better. The people who have to live with this are people who aren't in all of this all the time. So it has to be as clear as possible for them. And I feel like it went the other direction.
And let me be clear. I'm not sure it matters for purposes of, the will of the way the council wants to go. We could have any reason or no reason why we want to go with one structure or the other. I was just trying to better understand your objection, whether it was substantive of nature, whether it was the drafting, whether it was the drafting didn't make sense. It didn't allow you to fully vet whether you thought there were substantive differences, or just a general concern that you thought people wouldn't understand it.
Yeah, there's sort of the meta level of that was not what the law department was tasked with doing. And if they wanted to be creative, then they needed to come back and say, this is what we're thinking, and we could have a conversation about that. They just went and did it. It was an extraordinary amount of time to go through their draft because it wasn't just making the changes that they were asked. It was doing other things and being creative, and that I and my colleagues feel caused a lot of other problems that now is going to take time to sort through. That was unnecessary.
Okay. Thank you. Councilor Maliki.
Yeah, I basically second all those comments, and it just seems like on top of the various you can call them exemptions, you can call them loopholes or whatever, that the committee had agreed to, the law department, I guess inadvertently has kind of layered on, as we read it, another set of loopholes. And on top of that, a very confusing document, which, I mean, I think if you presented this draft to the average citizen, how would they understand if they had a protected exempt tree or an exempt protected tree or a non-exempt protected tree or none of the above? It's just incredibly hard to decipher. It's like cryptology or something. And I mean, among the loopholes that we see is nothing limits the definition of exempt tree to trees on the lot where construction may or may not happen. It doesn't explicitly exclude the abutter trees as not being exempt. It seems to eliminate a lot of requirements for consulting a certified arborist. Without requiring that, how would anyone know whether their tree is really a 39-inch tree or a 40-inch tree? It's just seems like a big mess here that ought to go back to committee to be resolved, because I certainly could not vote for what we're looking at. Thank you.
So your concern, Councilor Maliki, is that there were provisions that were removed or protections that were removed?
The addition of this concept of exempt tree, instead of leaving it as there were conditions under which applicants would not be required to make compensatory payments or plant compensatory trees, instead of leaving it at that, it created this concept of exempt tree, and I don't even know how to make sense of it. And for example, if they come in saying they don't plan construction, and then they or a subsequent owner comes in and actually does construction, does the formerly exempt trees status of being exempt get revoked? How does all that work? It's just a confusing mess.
Ms. Wilson, do you want to respond to? I thought there was language that actually talked about not only was the exemption revoked, but who it applied to. But Ms. Wilson?
So I'll respond to each of those points. The first, I believe, was that the exempt tree being abutting trees. Technically, the definition doesn't limit it to only the trees on the applicant's lot, but in practice, taking the definition, the exempt tree definition is just that, it's only a definition. So unless a provision references exempt tree, then it doesn't impact those sections. So exempt trees is only used in the application and replacement sections of the proposed ordinance. So an exempt tree only matters if you're applying on your own lot. So an abutting tree would never be an exempt tree. The second point was the taking out of the certified arborist. And for that, that's just up to the committee. It wasn't clear to us whether we believed that it was the committee's intent that they didn't want exempt trees or applicants with exempt trees to have to obtain a certified arborist for every removal if there was no construction planned. But if that's what the committee wants, that's easy enough to put right back into the draft. And then can you remind me the last point? Sorry.
Was if construction does take place on a lot after trees have been deemed exempt under the single 2-family no construction planned exemption, what happens? How do we know what happens?
Yes, that if construction does occur, then the exempt tree would no longer be exempt trees. The replacement would be required, or the payment in lieu.
And there's a
I
specific
believe
section
there's
that
language in
reference,
there.
right?
I can scroll through and find it. Yes, if construction takes place on a lot within the 24 months following the date of the exemption permit application, the current property owner will be required to comply with the replacement requirements.
And that is
21-80, 5D.
Thank you. Counselor Maliki, does that answer some of your questions?
No, I guess I'd like to know how would you, how would the law department have, without creating this new definition never asked for, how would they modify the ordinance that as it was last seen by the committee?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that question, Councilor Maliki.
So the law department created this new definition of exempt tree. If you had not done that, how would you have followed the instructions of the Programs and Services Committee?
Again, I'm not sure I follow it. The exemption was in the committee's draft. The committee agreed to this exemption, but took out of our existing ordinance the definition of an exempt lot. So we needed to label it. We tried to go back to the exempt lot definition that's in the existing ordinance. We found that that didn't really work because not all trees on an exempt lot are exempt from a permit. So we came up with the definition of an exempt tree, which we still believe is entirely consistent with the committee's intent.
And just to be clear, Mr. Temple, what you're talking about, and I think Councilor Maliki, part of what you're asking about, we used to talk about an exempt lot, and we used to say that none of the trees on that lot were touched. But in part of our work, the Programs and Services work, we have said that there are certain trees, trees of a certain size. I think it's legacy trees and landmark trees that are so big that they count no matter what. And so we don't exempt the whole lot anymore. What I think the law department is saying is that there are trees that are exempt, and many of those are on certain lots. And obviously any lot's going to include trees or not trees, but exempt trees exist. But even a lot where no construction is planned for a single or two family lot where no construction is planned for 24 months may include trees that are no longer exempt because they're so large that we, under the updates of the ordinance, need to account for those and actually have provisions made to replace those trees.
That's absolutely correct. And it's just a term that follows the policy and the language that was already in the ordinance.
All right, I'll let somebody else go.
Okay, I'll let other people talk. I won't weigh in yet. Councilor Humphrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I also had initially found the first memo to be a little bit dense and confusing, especially not as an attorney. I think that the response memo from the law department, the second law department memo, did clarify and address a lot of the specific points raised in the memo from some of the counselors. And we've also heard further discussion tonight. I think the chair just summarized very well here that, in fact, rather than adding loopholes, this rephrasing is actually making it clearer and stronger what the committee had proposed. It's not creating new trees that don't qualify for protections. It's actually saying more clearly and more legibly, I think, that, as the chair just said, there are certain situations where a lot has some trees that can qualify for an exemption permit and some trees that cannot qualify for an exemption permit no matter what. That's good. That's what we wanted. This is consistent with what the committee had decided. I understand that it's not consistent with what some of the people had wanted, but it's what the committee had recommended. And in many of the emails that we've received, there have been concerns, which I disagreed with the framing of the concerns because of this exact point, which is that there were emails suggesting that we had made blanket exemptions for all types of, like all one type of a lot or something like that, or two types of a lot across the entire city, no matter what. And that was not the case. In fact, there were many cases in which there were no exemptions on that lot. So, as has just been stated, exempt lot no longer makes sense as a framework, but exempt tree on a particular lot does make sense. And we had always said as a committee that there was going to be a process that you had to follow, whether you were qualifying for an exemption waiver or not, that you had to document it, you had to file the paperwork, etc. That's still in this proposal. That hasn't changed. But this is clarifying that in some cases, you're applying for a permit and you're going to have to do the replacement or the replacement fee. And in some cases, you're applying for a permit to remove it, but you're not going to have to do those things because you qualify, at least conditionally, for 24 months for an exemption waiver. And as we've talked about many times, there may be cases where you are initially granted an exemption waiver, and then that is rescinded later because you no longer meet the qualifications within the look back period or clawback period, whatever you want to call it. So while I understand this is a little bit confusing, I think this is actually getting us to a place of less confusion in the end, and is consistent with what the committee had recommended. Again, I'm more than happy to hear specific concerns laid out and get those addressed from our law team that's here tonight, and say, like, if you think there was a mistake that wasn't consistent with what the committee wanted, like, I definitely want to hear that and make sure that we get that addressed. But if the concern is just, well, there was a lot going on and it was long, we have worked on this for a really long time. I'd like us to get it done. And I'm not seeing so far, now that I've heard the discussion, heard the explanations, read both of the memos, I'm not seeing where the problem is in terms of matching what it is that the committee had recommended. So again, if there is a specific thing, I would please, I want to hear that, but I don't want to hear just like, no, I'm not listening, because that's not helpful right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Humphrey. I will say that there's at least one, which is the committee had talked about allowing low-income individuals to be exempt from having to pay certain fees. And I think we're going to see, which is not included in this draft. And I think
that I was setting to the side because they had said that they had set that to the side, and we're bringing that separately.
It's more to hold myself accountable to make sure we visit that before we move on. President Albright, welcome.
Hi, I'm so sorry that I'm late. I was in another event that Community Pride had sponsored, and I felt obligated to be there as well. So I'm sorry I'm late. I read through Councilor Norton and Malachi's memo, and what I want to say is that it's a pity that this better description of what the ordinance should be came so late.
Yeah.
The idea of the exempt tree versus the exempt lot. However, that being said, I think the law department has come to a better place, and rather than argue over, the fact that they've changed something, I think that the law department's response to Councilor Norton and Malachi's memo is very informative. It says, this is here, this is here, this is here, this is here. In most cases, it explained that what the intention of the committee is reflected in this new revision of the ordinance. There were some things towards the end of that memo which said, yes, we agree, or yes, if the committee wants to do that, we can do that. And it feels like it would be very useful to go through the law department's response to the memo and come to the places where there were responses. Yes, we could do that if the committee wants to. Yes, we could do that if the committee wants to. Yes, we agree with you. This was left out. If we go to those things and review them, we might actually get somewhere and be able to get this ordinance done by the end of this term and made into law. I want to reiterate that it's a pity that the idea of the exempt tree versus the exempt lot didn't come earlier in this discussion, but be that as it may, I understand why the law department has done it. I think it's good reasoning. And I think we can salvage this and move forward if we go back to that memo where the objections were stated and look at the things that the law department responded, and we could move through them quickly and get this thing done. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you, President Albright. We can certainly do that if folks want to do that. Councilor Greenberg?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand the docketer's angst about this definition change, but I really don't feel the law department is making policy here. They're just trying to clarify what we discussed. And after reviewing the memo, I think it does make it clear. And I agree with President Albright, maybe going through the memo and point by point would help. Thank you.
Okay, we can do that after the comments. Counselor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Council President Albright wasn't here for the earlier conversation, but I do think there are issues about what happens to abutters and the process. What I'm listening to in the sense of the memo and back and forth is ultimately something I think the chair had talked about, and we had an earlier version of this where there was kind of a schematic of sort of where you go and what happens to you. You know, you're entering the process. You have a tree. You ask what happens to it, and you can find your way through the maze in a sense to figure out what your requirements are. And as we've said all along, there's nothing in here that keeps the tree from being cut down. It's just a question of whether it's paid for. So I think that that's an important piece of this puzzle. But there were concerns raised that, and maybe going through the law department memo point by point, we'll do that. But there were concerns raised about what are the impacts on the abutters, and also I think there was a question of the process of notifying ISD and the also notification of abutters that are modified by perhaps by not deliberately, but by the department's modifications. So there are some potential substantive impacts, as I understand them, from at least the authors of the memo, Councilor Norton and Maliki, and they certainly can speak to those. But if it's the will of the committee to go through the sort of memo red line version, in other words, the law department, but I think it's going to be tricky because we're going to have to look at back and forth between the memo and the language. And maybe we can do that collectively, but that will require a little bit of management, I think, by the clerk and Ms. Norton to make it all work.
Yeah, we can, I'll tell you what, we'll go through it in a minute. I think, I don't want to make the blanket statement here, but I believe the points that were where the law department said, you know, we could certainly revisit that, or we could look into that. They were points that were not yet determined by the committee. It wasn't anything that was necessarily contrary to what the committee said. But I think it was saying, you know, that's sort of a novel question that had not yet been entertained. I may be wrong about that, so we can visit it either way. Councilor Greenberg.
I'm sorry, I had my hand up by mistake.
Fair enough. Councilor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we should go step by step. But one of the things that it appeared to me, they removed the agreed upon requirements for a tree plan, a tree protection plan, and a butter notification for exemption permits. Before we did it on all permits, not just non-exempt or exempt or whatever, but it should be on all of them. And one of the things is collecting the data on our tree canopy, getting an inventory, which I think is very important.
Let me just, before we pull up the memo and go through it, Mr. Welch, you had a docket item we had weighed in. We had consulted with you on a number of these things. I know there were concerns raised from the law department's draft. Without putting you on the spot too much, do you have an opinion on the draft from the law department, and do you have concerns as well?
Well, thank you for asking. I don't have concerns. I've gone through the memos. I've read it through. It feels like it hits all the points. It is a shift, I think, because, you know, we created that earlier draft on the one that we docketed that followed a very similar language to our current ordinance, which is old, and everything, you know, I'm sure can be updated. So my initial read, you know, it took me, you know, I had a couple of passes, but then I, you know, saw the memos and I read through them, and I think substantively it's still the exact same outcome. I have no concerns with going through the process. I think the only concern I have that going through this review process that I'm just not sure, because it's a little bit uncharted territory, is, you know, what is the grace period, if you will, for the folks who now have to, you know, the average homeowner who is exempt, who may have an exempt tree that needs to get an exempt permit before they remove it. What happens if they remove it inadvertently and just didn't know? And I hope that we can, you know, as we move forward, there's an education piece. I got a lot of ideas on how we're going to educate folks. But I hope that we can have some little bit of leniency as we work through this. It's really easy for a homeowner to accidentally remove a 6-inch diameter tree that's died in their yard, you know, without knowing that they had to get a permit. You know, if this passes in the next few months or so, or whenever it passes, I want to make sure that, you know, they aren't automatically in dire trouble, that we can work with them like we would now with someone who violates things, that, you know, we work with them to come in compliance.
My internet went out there for about 30 seconds while you were talking. I apologize. But caught what you were saying at the end. Did you have a specific request or change or proposal to deal with that?
I think the only thing is that I think I would really like to see considered is when we're looking at the fine structure. It's not an automatic. It allows for a warning if it's deemed appropriate versus a fine immediately. Like it's just, if someone makes an honest mistake and works to come in compliance, you know, why go to the trouble of forcing a fine if it's an honest mistake, especially, you know, when a situation where it really could be, you know, where we focus on the large trees, but it's really easy for someone to remove a 6-inch diameter tree, especially if it's a dead birch tree has 3 2-inch dead stems, and they just do it as part of their yard cleanup in the fall. But whoops, they made a violation. So I would just like to see if we can work towards a warning and not automatically a fine in some circumstances with some leeway there. That's all.
And Chair, sorry to jump in, but I think in order to address that concern, if the committee wants to, we'd really need to look at the language that says if you remove an exempt tree without a permit, the penalty is you need to replace that tree or pay for it. It sounds like what Mark is talking about is, rather than the penalty being replace and pay for it, it would be potentially something more lenient.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not currently reflected in the draft, is essentially what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's just for these circumstances where it's just a common sense approach. It's not a builder scenario or the larger trees or things like that. Even if it's a time period, I'm especially concerned that, you know, we're going to need to get the message out to over 20,000 property owners that what you could do at one point, you won't be able to do. And I think it's just it'd be unfortunate if there's an honest mistake and someone's has to pay a penalty for something that was an honest mistake.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Welch, appreciate it, and Mr. Temple. What I am hearing is, I think most of the committee is okay with this structure, but wants to revisit the memos to make sure all concerns are accounted for. I'm hearing a new proposal from Deputy Commissioner Welch. This committee can always do what it wants to do. So why don't we start going through that? Jacqueline, I hate to put you on the spot, but you are always so well prepared and so ready to assist. I'm guessing that you have the memo at your disposal and you can share your screen and show it to us so that we can go through that and all be on the same page one at a time. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's all ready to be shared.
Let's do it. So I think the easiest way is to look at the law department's response to the memo. This should all be in your packet and attached to the agenda anyway, but this was the concern about the definition of exempt tree. I think there was a response saying this is just the new structure. I think we sort of talked about that. I think the first several concerns have to do with the definition of exempt tree. If I'm wrong, Councilors Norton, Malicki, let me know. I think.
Which memo is this, so that I can pull it up on my screen too?
This is the law department's response to the memo from.
And it's dated November 6th from Jennifer Wilson.
November 6th, yes.
Okay.
Right, correct? Jacqueline, someone correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Again, I think the first 2 pages are talking about the
Madam-
exempt tree definition. If I'm wrong, someone stop me and tell me there's something in there we need to
Can I make a
address.
comment?
Yeah, Councilor Norton, go right ahead.
We literally got this yesterday. It's incredibly complicated. I think it's going to be incomprehensible for normal residents to try to understand. I was a co-docketer with Julia. This all started 3 years ago, and I feel like you are trying to rush this through. When I worked on another complicated thing, our divestment ordinance, we had a working group that worked on it for like, I don't know, a year and a half. And then we brought back something that was thoughtful, and we worked with the law department on it. So I'm not going to be able to look at this screen and, and I feel like it's disrespectful considering it was my item. So I really don't think you should be doing this right now. I think we should.
Councilor Baker?
Now, I'm increasingly troubled by trying to do this on a Zoom call where I'm looking at really two different documents. I'm looking at the law department memo, which has looking at the memo from our colleagues, then the law department response, and still trying to go back and look at the ordinance, which is attached to the agenda. I can do these when I can put them down in front of me and sit down in a room, but to do it on a Zoom screen and to make positive judgments about something of this importance really doesn't work for me. And I would really rather have the item held, talk a minute about some of the policy concerns that have come up in the conversation, and hold the item and then and remit it to our colleagues, to the co-docketers, to work with the law department and see if these issues can be resolved and bring them back to either decision points for the committee, but not take up our time to try and work through this language tonight. I think it's increasingly difficult. So I'd be prepared to move hold on it and let that process work out so that we could bring it back to the next committee meeting where everybody has a chance, at least those people who are directly involved as docketers could sit down with the law department and see if this can be resolved, rather than us try and work it out in this forum.
Councilor Humphrey?
Well, if you could have brought the printout if you needed it. I don't understand why that's now our responsibility, respectfully.
I haven't, Councilor Humphrey. I can't operate with a screen and a printout and a document on the screen that has red lines and blue lines on it and still pay attention to the colleagues and their comments. This is not what I view a committee responsibility to be. And so I'm going to move hold on this item. And if the committee wants to continue with it, then we can do that. But I'm going to move hold and ask that
I hadn't finished speaking.
Councilor Humphrey, finish what you were saying, then we'll entertain the motion from Councilor Baker.
Okay. So you're going to recognize him to make a motion after anyway. I'm also listed as a docketer on this item. Nobody bothered to consult or ask me before they sent a memo. I mean, there's some disagreement here, obviously. I understand that, but we're going in circles here on this is a real making a mountain out of a molehill situation.
Thank you. Councilor Humphrey is correct. Councilor Baker, you weren't recognized, but I'll recognize you right after I hear from Councilor Norton for the purposes of making your motion to hold. Councilor Norton?
I don't know who gets to decide what a mountain and a molehill is. This is important to me. I understand that what's important to me may not be important to you, Councilor Humphrey. So what I would appreciate would be the chance, considering the law department made a massive change without any notice, I would appreciate the chance to actually sit down with someone from the law department or both of you to go through this document, and anyone else who would want to join, which is the process that I have done with Marie Lawler, Maura O'Keefe, when they were with the law department and we were working on somewhat complicated issues. Again, because you made this massive change, and because I got another version last night, and because yesterday was a really busy day and I have a full-time job. So the idea that all of these complicated changes were made and we're expected to just speed ahead and approve this, that does not seem reasonable to me. I am very happy to set aside the time to try to work with you in a collaborative way so that we can make sure that the committee's preferences are incorporated, and that the document is logical to my mind as a non-attorney, to regular people, I would welcome that opportunity. I would ask the committee to not rush this through tonight.
Counselor Baker, you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I can make a motion. First, I want to apologize to my colleague, Councilor Humphrey. I didn't mean to interrupt him. I thought he was making a point to which I needed to respond, and I didn't mean to interrupt his comments. So that's my error. But I do think the substantive issue is how we go forward. And therefore, I would think the process of having a hold, let the opportunity between at least those docketers who've raised a question about the law department's draft, have a chance to sit with the department, work through these issues, and bring back, I hope, a committee draft that we can vote on relatively quickly at the next meeting would be in order. So that's why we're going to move forward.
Counselor Baker has moved hold. Discussion on that motion.
I support it. Oops. And I know, and also I do know that Counselor Norton was trying to set up a time with the law department, but you know, we get the response, I believe, on Monday, and yesterday was election day. Just didn't happen. And I think it's very appropriate with all these changes that she do have some time, and anybody else who wants to join them, to sit down with the law department.
Thank you, Counselor Wright. President Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the only thing I would change is that going through that, having the law department explain to the docketers the changes and why they were made and how they were made and what they mean is a good thing. But I don't think any policy changes should be made at that meeting. It should be just simply the law department explaining the changes that were made and how they were the same or different from what the original ordinance that we looked at, the docket item that we looked at last time. I'm not sure who said it, whether it was Councilor Baker or who said it, but there should be no policy changes made at this explanation meeting. Those are reserved for the committee to make. That's all I want to say.
Counselor Norton.
I was a member of the accessory apartment working group. I was a member of a working group with Becky and Lenny on the divestment ordinance, where we took back what the committee questions that people had. It was complicated, and we worked, I think, in both of those cases with Maura O'Keefe, and I've worked with Marie on others. It's just a matter of working together on something rather than being on a Zoom. I mean, this is like a group project in college on steroids that we're on Zoom trying to go word by word through this deadline. It really, to me, doesn't make sense to do it this way. So it's not about having some sneaky way of changing policy when people aren't looking. It's just having a chance to, as you said, to start, Council President Albright, to at least have an understanding of what does this mean? What does this mean? What are you referring to here? I don't understand this, so that we can just do that in a organized, logical, relaxed way.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, if the conversation produces a clarification about policy, and we've had one from Mr. Welch being recommended independently, I would hope that they could be framed and brought back to the committee so it'd be easy to decide. That's all.
Any other discussion on the motion to hold? Okay. Council Baker has moved hold. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Why don't you raise your hands? I didn't see who that was. Wright, Albright, Greenberg, Baker. 4. Okay. All those opposed, say aye.
No.
Aye.
Great. Any abstentions? I'll abstain. Okay. Item is held.
Only 2 opposed then, because there's only 7 of us.
Yeah. What did I say? Did I say more than 2?
I thought you said 3.
No, 2 opposed. 2 opposed. The item is held.
Who were the 2 opposed?
2 opposed were Ryan and Humphrey.
Thank you.
Right? Did I
Yeah.
Did I get that right? I'm certainly not trying to pull one over on anybody here. Okay. I certainly hope, Counselor Norton, I hope you, Counselor Maliki, whoever else can set up some time to meet with the law department and go over that. We certainly can't require a meeting to happen, but I think everyone, that's the hope of everyone, that will happen, and any concerns or questions can be raised and come back before the committee. I think the committee also wants to potentially take up the question from Mr. Welch. We also need to look at language on the low-income exemption. And those, I think, are the remaining issues before us here on this final night that we're going to just approve the law department's language and then move forward. Right. Sorry, just a little joke there. Okay, I think we only have one more meeting left, so we'll try and get some stuff done at that meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night.